Recording. Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining the session today. And we have the great pleasure of having Luke Thompson with us today.
Yeah.
And Luke is going to be taking us through some of the difficulties that some learners maybe have with switch access, and looking at how we can simplify things and make things a lot easier for them using a child-centered approach to switch progression. So I know, Luke, you have a lot of experience in this area, so it'd be great to listen to you and get some hints and tips from you. Okay, so I'll hand over to you now. Okay, thanks.
Brilliant. You can hear me, Craig? Yeah. If
Yeah,
anyone
hear
has
you nice and clear. Yeah.
Brilliant. You're all hidden behind my PowerPoint presentation, so just shout out if you have any questions. If someone raises hands and someone can speak out, I don't mind being interrupted. So my name's Luke Thompson. I'm an occupational therapist. I specialize in assistive technology, pediatrics, and neurodisabilities. I'm also the managing director of JOW Limited. Can I add a personal note? I really appreciate being able to present for Call Scotland. I have a very special place in my heart for Scotland. I grew up in Carlisle, so not very far away, and I studied for several years in Glasgow, and my father had a sailing ministry in the west of Scotland, so I spent a long time enjoying the west coast of Scotland for most of my life. So I've moved down to the south of England, but I have a very fond place in my heart for Scotland, and I count it a privilege to be able to share with you in this presentation. So the title of this presentation is the 7 Stages of Switch Development, a Child-Centered Switch Framework. And this is kind of a framework for children and young people aged 0 to 18 years old with complex communication difficulties arising from their neurodisability. It's targeted directly at switch users and those who support their learning. I presented this presentation, or a version of this, for the first time at Communication Matters in 2023. And then numerous other places since. So thanks if you've listened to this before, and also sorry. I have adjusted it slightly, but thank you for sticking with me. I also would like to acknowledge the Pace Centre, who where the idea originally birthed. So I was able to come up with this idea about the 7 stages of switch development at Pace. And I worked with Caroline Bennett, who helped co-author the stories, Sarah Ferguson, who's an OT, who helped with the research side, and Claire Donner, who is a speech and language therapist, who helped make sure that SLT input was scattered throughout the framework. I worked at Pace for over 7 years, setting up and running their AT service until leaving this last summer to set up JOW Limited. Pace kindly allowed me to take my little baby with me so that I continue to progress it and work on it. So I'm very appreciative. So I've set up JOW Limited. The aim of my company is to get to the heart of your tech life. So tech or assistive technology on its own is pretty much useless unless it's matched or connected to the heart of what a person wants to do and how they want to do it. Tech that's expertly and client-centeredly, it's not a word, and involved with the client can lead to fullness of life and an independent life. And so that's my mission. That's my aim in what I want to do. And I try and do this in several different ways. So I work with individuals. So I have a very small caseload that I see independently through JOW Limited. I then also work with organizations. So I'm a consultant for Steve Martin and Associates as an expert witness. So I write reports and do assessments for legal cases. And I'm working with CENMAC as a consultant, traveling into London, assessing and supporting the amazing CENMAC team in their work around schools and education and using assistive technology. And they're obviously working with their amazing students. And so that's where I've rushed back from today. So sorry if I'm a little bit rushed. I've just come off from the train and back into the house to get set up. And then the other way I'm working is online. So I've set up a website to provide AT resources to people. So that's at jow.life. So I've soft launched my website, which means it's not fully polished and ready yet. So then you might find some oddities on it, so feel free, please let me know if you find anything. But I'm planning on putting various AT-based resources on there. So there's an e-learning training module about an introduction to 7 stages. So if I don't get through it all, or you want to be reminded of it, or you want somebody else to hear about it, and you want it maybe fuller rather than this brief introduction, there is a module online, and you get a certificate when you complete it. So share that if you find it helpful. And the other way that I've learning to wanting to help people with AT is innovations. So I'm working with Empirical London on a few AT related ideas. Probably the most substantial is our power wheelchair simulator. So I came up with the idea to create a power wheelchair simulator that teaches alternative access methods as well as power wheelchair skills, particularly for those children and people that have maybe always been written off when it comes to power wheelchairs because they're not going to be a competent power wheelchair user. So the idea behind the simulator is that you can have unfettered, unrisk access to the controls of a power wheelchair. So that is one of the ideas. So that's me briefly. This session outline, I'm going to talk you a little bit about the background and the motivation behind the idea, how we developed the framework, and then finally I'll introduce you, and this is the best bit, to the Switch heroes and the framework, and we'll briefly go through it. And as I said, there is an online e-learning module that I've made available for free if you want a more in-depth kind of walkthrough. So first of all, this is my a family photo. So this is myself, my wife, Cherry, my daughter, Talia, and then the little girl behind the purple oval is Zhao. So Zhao is a little girl that my wife and I had been trying to adopt for several years. Sadly, that's no longer able to take place because of change in laws about adoption in the country that she's in. But yeah, she is the motivator behind what I do and why I do it, why I work in the field that I work in, and I feel it's been extremely helpful for me and my wife to have this focus, because whenever I'm working with a child, I come from it from a family point of view. I'm anchored to the story of the family when it comes to working with the clients that I work with, and hopefully you see that through the framework that I've developed. So I retrained later in life to be an OT. I had a longish career as a youth worker in Carlisle. When I qualified as an OT, I moved over to China for just over a year to volunteer at an orphanage. I noticed how many of the children at the orphanage that I worked at, their lives were very passive, and they were relying on others to do things for them. Yet many of them had that desire to be independent. You could see it. You could see their attempts to move and to get involved or engage with someone that walks in the room. When back in the UK and working in various SEN settings and therapy settings, I noticed how, although we have lots more resources here, I still frequently encounter this passiveness within many of the children that I worked with. And I'm particularly talking about children with neurodisabilities and motor disorders like cerebral palsy. At the same time, when you notice these things, there's always these outliers. There's all these children that don't fit the mold. And if you look at those outliers, those that had the greatest level of independence, yet they still had the similar levels of challenge. One of the patterns that I noticed was their use of assistive technology. And it appeared to me that those with greater challenges used switches to do more things with play, more things with movement, and with talking. Now, I'm assuming the majority of people online today are aware of what switches are. I've just got a couple of pictures on the screen now. Switches are a very basic kind of device. It's often a button, and when someone acts upon it, then there's a result. On the simplest level, you press and hold down that switch, and a toy moves. Or to the advanced level, if you think of Stephen Hawking's, he had a muscle switch on his glasses that touched a muscle here and responded to that. So, he wrote some amazing pieces of work. So switch technology, very basic, but can actually be used for very complex things. And there's a range of different types of switches out there. So it's not just my observation about how helpful and useful switches are. There's more intelligent people in the world that have written this down, and it's always good to go to written down stuff to check our own learning and views. So here's a couple of quotes. For children with complex neuro disabilities for whom both communication and movement are very challenging, switch technology acts as an enabler in developing skills for accessing the environment and giving the child a voice. Another quote, switch-enabled communication can positively impact a child's social communication skills, access to education, play, their ability to explore and control their environment. So, summarizing, it's their voice, hands, their feet. It's their ability to explore the world. But I don't know if you're like me, but through my experiences, this technology of switches sits often very low on the priority list. It's often the thing that is put away very quickly after somebody's issued a switch, put in a cupboard, moved aside. And I've encountered also when I've gone around to different schools and different parents' homes, I've noticed there's a lot of disjointedness when it comes to switch interventions and inconsistencies. So sometimes in some schools, it's all dependent on the teacher that's in that classroom and their view on switches and how they are going to develop switch skills. And then if that child moves to a different classroom, the framework or skill development is changed. I've encountered a lot of phobia around using switches and associated switch technology, like the interfaces and the software. And switch technology seems to lag behind other alternative access methods, like, for example, eye gaze, which seems to get lots of investment and lots of promotion. Yet the simple switches, which actually can, I think, be more useful to a larger potential, a larger user group, and be more natural in its use than using your eyes, using parts of your body to interact with things, is really underinvested in. So I continue to professionally explore the world of switches. And many of you, like me, probably discovered, used, and enjoyed the very few existing switch frameworks that are out there. These switch progression frameworks offer health and education practitioners guidance for types of switches to use and switch skill progression. These include, but are not limited to frameworks like Linda Burkhart's Stepping Stones to Switch Access, or Ian Bean and Inclusive Technologies Switch Progression Roadmap. And then there is Indigo, which is an Australian company that have amalgamated both these approaches in something called Unlocking Abilities, Keys to Developing Switch Skills. But I don't know about you, so I've used these, I've enjoyed these, I've studied these, they've educated me. But when I've gone to use them and to remember them in assessments or in my work, I've really struggled to retain the information. It might just be me, but I feel like I have encountered other people with similar struggles. And I've also struggled to get engagement from families and school staff to use these models or to understand them. It just seems like when I've used the language of these frameworks, it's just been me on my own. And despite the existing availability of these switch progression frameworks, in my experience of working in the schools alongside teachers, unless they had a specific training or have actively studying it themselves, knowing how to progress a child or young people with using switches is extremely challenging. And furthermore, incorporating switch frameworks into a school curriculum is also problematic. So again, for those of you like quotes, here is a couple more about the challenge that many people face. Technology, as we all know, is a moving target. Every day technology advances and it continually creates new opportunities for people with disability to be able to explore their worlds. However, as technology has become more advanced, here's a quote, so has the variety and functional capabilities of switches. Brilliant. However, without sufficient awareness, knowledge, and experience of understanding switch progression, it can be a challenge for health and education practitioners to navigate. So if it's hard for health and education practitioners to navigate, what about users and their families. It's obviously going to be even more. Most of the families that I've ever worked with are extremely busy. Their lives are full. They from the morning through to the evening through the night. They don't have capacity to learn and implement lots of new Switch stuff. So, has anyone considered that when we're thinking about switch progression? Health and education practitioners, it's difficult for them to navigate, but it certainly is difficult for families as well and the users. So I percolated on this situation for a few years until I had this eureka moment a few years ago now, which several of my colleagues at Pace remember the day I came in like a child at Christmas. I had this genius idea, and it's this. It's not really a genius. It's kind of obvious. Believe in the child. Be enduringly optimistic about the cognitive abilities of the child who will use a switch, to teach them about the switch development framework, not to teach therapists who teach educators who then teach parents who then pass it on. Let's flip it on its head, focus on the child, and then the parent learning, and then the educator, and so on. Now, this isn't really a genius idea. Um, I think it's pretty obvious. Nearly every conference I've been to in the last 10 years has had someone do some research and conclude that to improve things, we need to involve the child and the family more. So if we need to improve an assessment, it needs to have input from the child and family more. If we need to improve a service, we need the child and family's voice more at the foundational levels, if we're going to do that. And so I often hear these talks, but then it's really hard to implement that. I found it in with even doing this switch framework. There is pushback. There is a natural push to focusing on therapists, educators, rather than on the user. I've even had comments like, "Well, the children I work with won't understand that," and so there is a challenge to overcome. But I hold to the principle that if I taught my daughter when she was babbling to only think, well, she can only babble, so I'm only going to babble, then she would still only be babbling to this day. We have to be optimistic. We can't just give up. I didn't go when I was teaching my daughter how to say the word foot. I didn't go foot, and then she went babble, and I went, oh, she doesn't know how to do it. I assumed that over time she would learn it. So I was optimistic, and she can say the word foot today, which is excellent. Now, and also it's a logical progression to focus on the family. I've come up with this statistic, and it's completely made up, but I think you'll agree with the first one. The child spends 100% of their time with themselves. So I think we can all agree on that. Then I've made an assumption that a lot of the parents I work with spend a heavy amount of time with the child, with their child, particularly if they've got a disability. Often the children aren't at school. They're often going to appointments. They're often off sick. So the parent and the carers around the child spend 90 to 75% with their child, with their child. And then educators, people like myself and therapists, we spend a very small amount of the time with our child. So to invest in the educators and therapists to understand switch progression, and to negate not providing for the child to understand, I think doesn't make sense. Not very efficient. The child obviously understands himself and spends all their time with themselves, and then the parent are the next. So in regards to the phrase stakeholders, they're the key stakeholders to invest in, surely. So again, with that in mind, I came up with my genius idea to develop and target materials around switch development at the child. So I realized that they need the input, they need educating, and it takes time. Children need time to learn about switch progression and switches before ever being given switches. And I've learned this quite quickly as somebody that goes around and assesses children who need switch access. I've worked with children as young as newborns all the way up to 20+ year olds. And if you're a newborn or a young child and you meet me for the first time, I'm 6'2". I've come in with lots of equipment. I've got boxes and boxes of switches and mounting solutions, and they do all this exciting and fun thing, which can be extremely intimidating. So for the first time these children often ever hear or learn about a switch, is very intimidating. And sometimes my sessions are only about breaking the ice and becoming the child becoming comfortable with me, rather than being able to try a million different types of switches to see where they're best positioned or which one works best and what to attach it to. So it's very scary. So I came up with this idea of getting stories. And humans, I've got a story here for you to as an example. Um, us human beings tend not to like uncertainty or the unknown. So here's a picture of my daughter and wife. It's the first time we flew back to China after the pandemic. First time my daughter, who was a 2-year-old in this photo, was going to spend 13 hours on an aeroplane. First time on a flight. And as a good occupational therapist, I knew that that is a nightmare. It's a complete nightmare to put a young child on a contained space and try to get them to stay still. So knowing that, I implemented this thing of preparing her for these flights. So I created a social story. We had a poster on the wall. We talked about aeroplanes. We watched cartoons about aeroplanes and what was going to happen. We broke down that we're going to pack our bags. We're going to get in the car. We're going to go to the airport. So we broke this all down into this kind of story, and we prepped it until we went. And it worked really well. She was very content on the flight. She understood what was going on. She understood all the stages, and therefore she wasn't as stressed as I think she would have been. So we came up with the idea, and we presented this idea of creating a social story, so a book about switch progression, about these switches, this is what they do, and kind of these are the different stages that you're going to journey through. And we presented that to Speech and Language UK, who kindly funded us for a year to do some research and to then progress this idea further. And so obviously the key thing is research and including the users, doing user-centered design. I had the initial idea, but I know that it is completely incomplete without user-centered feedback. And so there was 4 stages of the research. And I'll just go briefly through these because I know time is running short, and then I will go through the best part of the presentation, which is the 7 stages of switch development. So the first one is first stage of research was a literature search and desk research. So that meant that I looked at the existing research on switches that is out there, and we looked to analyze the evidence about progression. And what we found is that there wasn't any. We were planning on doing what we call a scoping review, looking and comparing all of the research and trying to come up with a modern or up-to-date alternative. But there's not research. There's research about how successful switches can be, but nothing about the developmental scaling or progression. And so we made an opinion article, which is in Communications Matters article in 2023 and in the OT news. And then the other part of the research was the desk research, where I searched out, and this horrible slide on the screen is just for example stages. So for an example, I along the top is the different kind of progression frameworks and models that I could find, and then each of their steps. And our idea was to see the patterns in there and then kind of condense it into a one simpler example. And then the second part of our first phase research was, again, obviously to collect the feedback from switch users and their families, and as well as educators and professionals that work in that field. And we got this level of input. So we got the large majority of respondents reported that there was no consistency in use with switch progression frameworks in their workplace or school, that either they agreed or strongly agreed that there was no standard procedure for recording switch development or progression. So children, and again, I've seen children that have been quite advanced skill in switches, moved class. I've seen them a year later and they're back at the very early stages of cause and effect using switches. And so that again came across in the research that is not just a unique experience for me. That happens in lots of places. They reported that the most important aspect for switch development was for development framework was to be simple, easy to remember, and user-centered. And there were mixed feelings again about how much the Switch user should need to be involved with the understanding of Switch progression. But again, I'm hoping to champion that I think any interventions that we do, we should think of how we can explain that to the person that is going to use it in the clearest language for them. Um, and they highlighted that providing support for parents was really important. And then after we got that, we merged that first phase together and came up with a draft proposal that we then presented through surveys and focus groups and collected feedback and criticisms and positive sides of it so that we could then hone it a little bit. And so these are some of the changes we made based on that feedback. We looked at the progression title that we had proposed, which was based on the Dreyfus and Dreyfus scale, which had like the words competent and mastery. People didn't like that. They thought if you were competent at one stage and you were incompetent at another, and they thought that was quite negative. So we changed it to a more positive language. People wanted more diversity in names. We tried really hard, but they wanted more diversity in names. And we must have got it right now because I'm getting complaints about not being able to say the names. So that's must be right now. Superhero theme. People like the superhero theme. Genuine representation within the drawings and characters. People wanted an alternative pathway for the children that might not progress, and then differentiation for physical or cognitive challenges. So, and then once we then made changes again to our framework and resources and presented that to experts in the switch field, those who are most known for switch access and using switches in their work. And we invited as many as we could to give us feedback to then make further changes. And then the final stage, and I am aware that our model is not perfect and it won't fit everyone's situation, and we've tried to make it as flexible as possible, and we're up to it to being continually built upon and developed. So this next phase is continuously open to feedback so we can develop further resources. Obviously, Agile Limited is going to hold the resources, so obviously we don't want it to lose its identity and become completely different, but we will hold the resources, and then if people can join with us and give us feedback, that will be extremely helpful. So without further ado, with very short time left, I'm very sorry about this, but again, there is the model online, the e-learning online, if people want to go on that, and it will do a more thorough walkthrough of the 7 stages. So this is the 7 stages of Switch development. So we have our Switch heroes characters, and there's 7 of them. I hope you can see that the illustrations are very representative of many of the children that you might work with, or it might be your children, or might be you. We tried our best to make sure that there was amazing representation, and I think we did a really good job with that. And let me introduce you to the characters. So we have, Exploring Egbert, the elephant, Journeying Zhao, the giraffe, Growing Gareth, the goat, Budding Brayton, the bear, Flourishing Fatima, the flamingo, Succeeding Safi, the squirrel, and Celebrating Saeed, the sloth. Can I just check? I know I'm getting very close to the time, Craig. Do you want me to carry on or cut off?
A few more minutes, Luke.
A few more minutes. Yeah, just give me.
Sure. And would you also be able to put the link in for your e-learning module as well?
Yeah. So it's jiao.life, jiao.life, and if you go on there, you will see that there is the e-learning module.
Okay.
So where would you get to? Sorry, we're Growing Gareth, the 3rd stage, Budding Brayton, Flourishing Fatima, Succeeding Safi, and Celebrating Saeed. And so you can actually break the model down into 4. So they pair together. So Exploring Egbert and Journeying Zhao pair. That's the cause and effect level. Growing Gareth and Budding Brayton are the playing and using 2 switches, and then the Flourishing Fatima and Succeeding Safi are about switch scanning, and then finally Saeed on his own is the functional side. So I briefly go through what each stage represents. So we have exploring Egbert, and this is learning by experience. So it's the cause and effect stage. We also have differentiated shapes and colors. So if people don't want to use the characters, we also have you have the red circle. You could have a red circle or a circle or just the color red. So again, just to make it flexible for people to use how they see fit. So this is very early stages of cause and effect, experimental learning. The next stage, journeying Jiao. This is when someone can intentionally make happen. So when they press the switch, they have that pre-knowledge, understanding that something will happen. So you can see in their face that they know that they're intentionally pressing the switch and they anticipating the response. We then move on to using two switches, and we explore using two switches. I encourage everyone to always try with two switches before looking at just using one switch with scanning. So try play with two switches and see if it works. Work with your OT about finding a place to an access point. So we're playing with two switches to make two very different things happen. So two switches, two contrasting things. So maybe one switch that does vibration and another switch that does lights, so that the child can differentiate that these switches do different things. And then moving on, we will start to use these two switches together for one activity. So using two switches for one activity, this is where a lot of the Big Macs, smooth talkers can come in handy. So you could do an activity like one says, build it up. So you build up toy towers, build it up. And then the other one says, knock it down. So they're using these two switches for this one activity. And then we move on to switch scanning. This is where you use two switches, one to scan and then the other to select. So this is where we're playing with two switch scanning, and this is error-friendly learning. So they don't have to get the right option. They don't have to choose correct option, and they can. This is more likely you could do this manually with voice output or audio output switches, so the Big Macs and the step-by-steps. You could do that manually. Someone can walk around a room with a frame. Often people will maybe do this on a computer. So we're starting to play, but we don't give them lots of options when we start, and we don't give them the challenge of they have to correctly answer something. You can scan through activities, so you can have like musical instruments. Do this one, next one, this one, that one. And then the next level of switch scanning is we've got to find the right one. So we start using scanning to find the right one. So if you're saying, oh, there's a bear there with a banana, you have a bear in the room with a banana, and you ask them, what is the bear got in his hand? That they have to then scan through to find the right one. And you can, on a communication aid, something like Grid 3, you can create a blank space, and you can have the banana in another and a blank one, and they got to scan through and press on the banana. And then you can start grading it and make it more complicated by putting an apple and a banana and a blank one, and they've got to find the banana. So, and then the final stage is celebrating Syed, and this is when you start to use switches across different devices for multiple things. So you're going to use it for communication, then you're going to use it for playing games, and you're going to use it to drive your power wheelchair. Sorry that I've gone super fast. There are some resources. Again, these are available on the website. So the assessment tool, I find this really helpful when I'm working with families. I use the assessment tool to demonstrate the 7 stages and how you can progress through them. Our module, this framework isn't linear, so it's not like you have to work and then you stop working on one and you move on to the next. As you can see across the bottom here, there is the 7 stages. Then we have 3 steps: emerging, consolidate, and proficient. A child can be working on multiple stages at one time. For example, you could be consolidating and exploring Egbert, and then you could be emerging in journeying Jiao. You can use this assessment tool as a goal, so you can put in a date that you think they'll get to one. It gives you that consistency of when they move class, that you can see where they're at. You can put little notes in there, and again, there's 7 books, so they are available on Amazon at the moment. I accidentally somehow released them, apart from Celebrating Saeed. If you want to buy multiples, if you're a school or anything, you want to buy multiples, it's probably best coming to me. I haven't fully finalized and sorted them all out. But yeah, well, I've tried to keep them as cheap as possible. But so the books are on available to buy on my website or on Amazon. They're social stories. Oh, sorry. They are social stories. They have digital books, QR code for digital books and an audiobook. There are other things on our website. So there's the posters. So there's the simple poster and a detailed poster, and then there are I do e-learning modules and the information sheets that will explain in detail the levels. And so, sorry that the end was quite rushed. If you have any questions for me, I have my email address on the screen, and that is the website. And I will just for the recording put on the references if somebody wants to pause on that, and then I will go back to my email. And then, sorry, there we go.
Thanks, Luke. That's okay. Thanks, Luke. So Nicholas saying, thank you very much. As an OT working in this area for almost 30 years, this has made me feel validated in my determination to keep going with switches and switch access for the young people that she works with, and loves the framework and family focus. And the materials are lovely. They're lovely and colourful and engaging. So well done, Luke. That's great.
Thank you.
We don't really have time for questions, I'm afraid, but we've got your email address there, and I've also popped the link to the course and the resources into the chat pane as well. So hopefully they're there for everyone too. So thanks, Luke. Thank you. And
thank you. And again, sorry it was a bit rushed.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.